morning sun rose slowly over the open land, painting the hills in gold and orange. Wind moved softly through the dry grass, whispering across the fences of the old ranch. Mary, the rancher's daughter, saddled her horse before anyone else was awake. She had always been a little different from the other girls in town, brave, restless, and full of pride. Some called her rebellious, but she never cared what others said. She loved the land, the wide sky, and the freedom of the saddle. Her father, Mr. Caldwell, was a strict man who had worked the land all his life. He loved his daughter deeply but never understood her wild heart. "Stay close to the house," he told her that morning. "There's been trouble in the canyon. Some cattle went missing," but Mary only smiled and said, "I'll be careful." Her father shook his head, knowing that once she made up her mind, there was no stopping her. She rode out toward the south pasture, her brown hair blowing in the wind. The land stretched far and wide, with no sound but the beat of her horse's hooves. She followed the tracks of the missing cattle until they led into the narrow canyon. The sun grew hotter and the air smelled of dust and sagebrush. Deep inside the canyon she found signs of campfires, still warm. She dismounted and knelt down, touching the ashes. Someone had been there not long ago. Her heart raced. She looked around, calling out, but only her echo answered. The quiet made her uneasy, but her pride told her to stand tall. She had always wanted to prove she was strong enough to protect her family's land. Then she saw movement among the rocks, shadows of riders leaving quickly down the trail. She ran to her horse, climbed on, and shouted after them, "You have no right to be here." Her voice echoed across the rocks, sharp and fearless. But when she tried to follow, her horse stumbled on loose ground. She lost her balance and fell hard on the rocky slope. Pain shot through her leg. She tried to stand but couldn't put weight on it. Her horse panicked and galloped away, disappearing into the distance. For the first time, fear touched her heart. The canyon felt bigger now, the silence heavier. She tried to call out, but her voice was lost in the wind. The sun moved across the sky. Hours passed, and the heat drained her strength. She dragged herself toward the shade of a dry bush, her hands trembling. Her leg throbbed and dust covered her face. She looked around, hoping to see her horse come back, but the land was empty. Clouds began to gather above the canyon. The wind turned cold. She knew a storm was coming. She tried to move again, crawling toward a low ridge, but every breath felt heavy. Rain started to fall in small drops, turning the ground dark. Her clothes clung to her skin and her hair stuck to her face. The thunder rolled across the land, loud and endless. Mary pressed her hand against her chest, trying to calm her heartbeat. She thought about her father waiting at home, wondering why she hadn't returned. Regret filled her eyes. She had wanted to show courage, but now all she wanted was to be safe. Lightning flashed, showing the shape of her horse far away, running across the plain, but it was too far for her to reach. She lay down against the cold earth, whispering a prayer. The storm grew stronger, and the world became a blur of rain and sound. Miles away, a cowboy named Luke was riding home from town. He was tall and quiet, with a calm strength that came from years of hard work. He had heard stories about the Caldwell Ranch and the rancher's stubborn daughter, but he had never met her. When he saw a horse running loose through the storm, he knew something was wrong. He followed the tracks through the wet ground, the rain soaking through his coat. His instincts guided him through the darkness until he saw a faint figure lying near the ridge. He jumped off his horse and ran toward her. Mary was barely conscious when she felt someone lift her gently from the mud. She opened her eyes weakly and saw a man's face under the brim of a hat. "You're going to be all right," he said softly. His voice was steady, calm like the land itself. He wrapped her in his coat, shielding her from the rain. She tried to speak, but her lips only moved faintly. He lifted her onto his horse, holding her carefully as they rode through the storm. She leaned against him, half awake, hearing only the rhythm of his heartbeat and the rain. The ride seemed endless. The horse struggled against the wind, but Luke never slowed. When they finally reached a small wooden cabin near the creek, he carried her inside and laid her down by the fire. The cabin was quiet and warm compared to the storm outside. He took off his wet jacket and quickly built a fire, his hands moving with care. Then he found a blanket, wrapped her in it, and checked her leg. It was swollen but not broken. He washed the cut on her hand and gave her a sip of water. Mary opened her eyes again, blinking at the firelight. "Who are you?" she whispered. "Name's Luke," he said gently. "You were hurt bad out there. Just rest now." She wanted to thank him, but her voice faded. He sat nearby, watching her to make sure she was breathing steadily. The fire cracked softly and the sound of rain faded into the distance. Through the night, she woke several times, feeling warmth and safety she hadn't felt in years. She saw the cowboy sitting by the fire, his head bowed, his eyes thoughtful. Each time she drifted back to sleep, she heard his quiet voice saying, "You're safe now." By dawn, the storm had passed. The cabin glowed in soft morning light. Luke stepped outside briefly to check on the horse and returned with fresh water. Mary tried to move but winced. "Easy," he said, helping her sit up. "You need to stay still until your leg feels stronger." She looked at him closely for the first time. A man with tired eyes, a few scars, and hands rough from hard work. There was kindness in his face, the kind that didn't ask for thanks or reward. She realized he had probably stayed awake all night just to make sure she lived. When he gave her a cup of warm tea, she smiled weakly. "You didn't have to do all this," she said. "I couldn't leave you there," he replied simply. For a moment, neither spoke. Outside, the sun rose higher, lighting the valley below. The storm had washed everything clean and the air smelled fresh and new. Mary leaned back against the wall, feeling peace for the first time since the accident. She knew her father would be worried sick, but she also knew that if Luke hadn't found her, she might not have made it through the night. As she looked at the cowboy sitting quietly near the fire, she wondered why a stranger would risk so much for someone he didn't even know. But deep down, she felt a quiet truth. Sometimes people cross paths at the exact moment they're meant to. Not by plan or chance, but by something greater. She closed her eyes again, listening to the sound of the fire and the soft hum of the morning wind. For now, she didn't want to think about what came next. She just wanted to rest, safe in the warmth of the man who had appeared in her darkest hour and carried her back toward the light. The morning light filled the small cabin, touching everything with a soft golden glow. The rain had stopped and birds were singing outside in the trees. Mary slowly opened her eyes and felt warmth for the first time since the storm. Her body still hurt, but her heart felt lighter. She saw Luke near the fire, carefully putting wood on the flames. He turned when he heard her stir. "You're awake," he said with a small smile. His voice was calm, like always. Mary tried to sit up, but her leg hurt too much. Luke helped her gently, placing a pillow behind her back. "You shouldn't move too much," he said kindly. "You need rest," she nodded. "How long was I asleep?" "Almost a full day," he said. "Your fever went down this morning." She looked around the cabin. It was small but neat. A table, 2 chairs, a bed, and the old stone fireplace. A few coats hung on the wall and a pot of coffee sat near the fire. Everything felt peaceful. "Where are we?" she asked. "An old line cabin," Luke said. "Ranchers use it when they're out checking cattle. I keep it stocked with a few things." Mary smiled faintly. "You've saved me twice then, first from the storm and now from going hungry." Luke chuckled quietly. "I just did what needed to be done." He poured her a cup of coffee and handed it to her carefully. The smell of it filled the room, rich and strong. She took a sip and it warmed her chest. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. Luke didn't talk much, but his presence filled the cabin with a strange calmness. He moved slowly and spoke gently, never rushing anything. Over the next few days, Mary grew stronger. Luke stayed nearby, tending the fire, cooking simple meals, and checking on her wound. Each day he helped her step outside for a few minutes to feel the sun. The valley below the cabin was green from the rain, and wildflowers had started to bloom. One afternoon, she sat on a wooden chair by the door, watching the light dance across the hills. "You live out here alone?" she asked. He nodded. "Mostly. I work cattle for a few ranches when they need extra hands. It's quiet, but I like it that way." "Don't you get lonely?" she asked softly. Luke looked toward the horizon. "Sometimes," he said. "But I figure it's better to be alone with peace than surrounded by people and noise." Mary thought about her own life, about her father, the ranch, and how she had always felt like she didn't fit the place where she was born. She had spent years trying to prove she could do everything by herself, that she didn't need anyone's help. But now, sitting there with her bandaged leg and the cowboy who had saved her, she felt differently. Maybe strength wasn't about doing everything alone. That night, as the fire flickered low, Mary told Luke everything. She spoke about her father, her late mother, and how she had ridden into the canyon to prove herself. Her voice trembled a little when she said, "I wanted him to see I was strong, not foolish." Luke didn't interrupt. He just listened, his eyes calm and understanding. When she finished, he said quietly, "You have a strong heart, Mary. But sometimes strength is knowing when to ask for help, not when to refuse it." His words stayed in her mind long after he said them. The days passed gently. Her leg began to heal and she could walk with Luke's help. They gathered firewood together, and sometimes she cooked while he repaired the saddle or mended his coat. The quiet between them grew comfortable, filled with soft laughter and small moments of peace. One evening they sat outside as the sun turned the sky orange and pink. The air was cool and still. Mary looked at Luke and said, "I don't know how to thank you for what you did." Luke smiled a little. "You already have. You're still here, that's enough." She watched him in silence, wondering how someone so quiet could carry such kindness. He had risked everything for her without asking who she was, without expecting anything in return. As the last light faded, she whispered, "You could have left me there, but you didn't." Luke looked at her seriously. "No one deserves to be left alone," he said. "Not when someone can help." The next morning, Mary woke early to find him saddling the horse. "You're leaving?" she asked, her heart tightening. He shook his head. "Just going to check the trail, make sure it's safe for the ride back to your ranch. You're strong enough now to go home." Her heart felt heavy at his words. Home. She had dreamed of it when she was lost. But now the thought of leaving this quiet place and the man who had saved her made her uneasy. She didn't know how to explain it. When he returned, he helped her mount the horse. The ride back was slow, the air fresh after the storm. They didn't talk much, but their silence was full of unspoken things. As they reached the familiar fence lines of her family's ranch, she saw her father running toward them, his face full of fear and relief. "Mary!" he shouted, his voice breaking as he reached for her. He lifted her down from the horse carefully. "I thought I'd lost you," he said, tears filling his eyes. Mary hugged him tightly, her own eyes wet. "I'm all right, Pa," she whispered. "Thanks to him." She looked back at Luke. Mr. Caldwell turned to the cowboy and reached out his hand. "I owe you more than I can ever repay," he said sincerely. Luke shook his hand. "You don't owe me anything, sir. I just found her and did what I could." "Please, come stay for supper," her father insisted. "It's the least we can do." Luke hesitated, glancing at Mary. She nodded softly, her eyes full of gratitude. He finally agreed, and they all went inside. That evening, the ranch house was filled with warmth and laughter again. Her father couldn't stop thanking Luke, and the ranch hands came by to welcome Mary home. She told them only a simple version of what had happened, but her eyes always found Luke across the table. After dinner, when everyone had gone quiet, Luke stood and said, "I should be heading back before dark." Mary's heart sank. "You're leaving already?" she asked. He smiled gently. "I've got work waiting in the next valley. You'll be fine now." Her father shook his hand again, promising he'd always be welcome at the ranch. But Mary followed Luke outside to where his horse was tied. The air was cool and stars were beginning to appear. "Will I ever see you again?" she asked softly. Luke paused for a moment, tightening the saddle strap. "Maybe," he said. "The world's big, but sometimes people cross paths twice if they're meant to." Mary smiled faintly, though her eyes shone with emotion. "Thank you for saving me," he tipped his hat. "Take care of that leg, and listen to your old man once in a while." She laughed through her tears. "I'll try." Luke mounted his horse and looked at her one last time. "Goodbye, Mary." Then he turned his horse toward the hills and rode off into the fading light. Mary stood there for a long time, watching until he disappeared beyond the horizon. The sound of his horse faded, leaving only the wind and the quiet hum of the night. In the days that followed, Mary's life slowly returned to normal. She worked beside her father again, helping with the cattle and fences, but something inside her had changed. She was still brave and strong, but no longer reckless. She had learned that courage was not about fighting the world. It was about facing it with grace, patience, and kindness. Sometimes, when the evening sky turned red and gold, she would ride out to the edge of the hills and look toward the west. She imagined Luke somewhere out there, tending cattle or sitting by another fire, maybe thinking of her the same way she thought of him. She kept the old coat he had wrapped around her that stormy night, folded neatly in her room. It reminded her of hope, of second chances, and of the quiet stranger who had found her when she thought all was lost. Years later, People still spoke of the rancher's daughter, who was strong and fearless. But those who knew her best said that what truly made her special wasn't her courage. It was her heart, shaped by a cowboy's kindness on a stormy night when the world could have turned dark, but instead became bright again. And though she never said it out loud every time the wind rose across the plains, she smiled, because somewhere in that sound she could still hear the echo of hooves and the gentle voice that once said, "You're safe now."